Pam
Oh, we're
Bondi was
live. We're live. Sorry.
well, it was
Hi,
Pam Bondi's
everybody.
histrionics. Hey, everybody.
Hi, everybody. I'm still, it's 2 years in. I'm still not used to this live function. Sometimes I get myself in trouble. It's a good thing we didn't say anything bad about anybody, which we do. We
we
do.
do. We definitely do it. Like I said, they delayed me like an hour because they were covering Pam Bondi. So I was like, "What's going on?" And I turned it on, and it was
We're not here to
wild.
talk about domestic politics, but what a missed opportunity by both sides. Because I was watching, and it's like, to score points against the other one, you know, the president did this, and then the other one's defending the president.
I
And it's
know.
like, just, Congress really has abandoned, and on so many things, like it's
100%.
it's
It was just
function. It's
total
oversight
dysfunction.
function. It's such a disappointment.
Yeah.
Wow, we have
It's
a lot
been
of
bad.
people on, so let's
Great.
not waste
Okay,
any
well, let's
time.
start.
Hi, everybody. We call this War and Board of Peace because on one hand, we're possibly about to go to war. The president is trying to have nuclear talks with Iran at the same time. And then we have so much going on in the West Bank, and we're still talking about Gaza. So let's just dive in. President Trump is meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu today.
Right now, as we speak.
As we speak. We have this moment where the three tracks are colliding, really. Iran talks, ceasefire, Gaza ceasefire, implementation, and then what's going on in the West Bank. So what do you think Netanyahu wants most from this visit?
Oh, I think he was somewhat alarmed that last week the president of the United States said that a nuclear-only deal with Iran would be acceptable. And, not long after the president said that, the Netanyahu announced that he was coming to the United States. And I think the Israelis are resigned to the fact that there may be a negotiation going on with the Iranians. They don't want their security to be sacrificed. And their big issue now is Iran's ballistic missile program, which they did a significant amount of damage to, but the Iranians have reconstituted with the help of the Chinese, apparently.
How much, really? A lot? I mean...
It's really hard to tell.
Reconstituted in this amount of time.
It's hard to tell, although, up to the 12-day war, which I think it really needs a better name, but that's a totally different discussion. But up to the 12-day war, the Defense Intelligence Agency was saying that left unchecked, the Iranian ballistic missile program would, within 10 years, be one of the top 4 ballistic missile inventories of ballistic missiles in the world. So you can imagine the Israelis did a lot of damage and got a lot of their launchers, but, it's now been, 6-7 months since then. If they actually are getting Chinese help, which I think there are credible reports that they are getting Chinese help, that they do have, and here's the problem for the Israelis, whereas even if the Iranians haven't ramped up their ballistic missile program as much as perhaps they are portraying publicly, the Israelis are out of interceptors, or not out of interceptors. They have a limited number of Arrow interceptors. They have to manufacture more. The United States also doesn't have as many.
The interceptors, like the missile defense, to be able to shoot them down, which is what has been so successful against Iran in the past. On the nuclear program, though,
well, so this is the thing that confounds me.
It didn't want to give up any of it enriched uranium. And the ironic thing is it can't really enrich much right now.
Well, so this is the thing that's sort of confounding. Why are we having a nuclear negotiation with the Iranians if we totally obliterated it, as the president said, 2 hours after, the airstrikes on the Iranian nuclear program? It seems to me that the United States put itself in a position where the Iranians said, well, let's have a negotiation. The president's like, okay, let's have a negotiation. But they want to limit it in order to buy themselves some time. I mean, these negotiations really are handing a lifeline to the regime at a moment when they were mowing down protesters in the streets.
That regime was really on the ropes, about to, I wouldn't say it was about to crumble, but it was at its weakest moment ever.
Right.
And then
you talk to Iranian,
this is a pretty good position for the Iranians to be in right now, right?
Right. And if you talk to the, Iranian oppositionists, they lament the fact that there's a negotiation, because not necessarily that they want airstrikes or a war, but that negotiation gives a lifeline to a terrible regime, which we now know has gunned down, thousands of people, perhaps tens of thousands of people in a relatively short period of time. So it
And
seemed
Trump said all this. Look, we have to acknowledge that Trump initially, all this military action,
was to
help is
help the
on the way.
protesters.
Help
Help
is
is
on
on
the
the way.
way,
Right, exactly.
right?
And now we're in a nuclear negotiation, which seems to me that the Iranians have sort of hoodwinked Trump into a negotiation, bought
Right.
themselves a lot of time. They're moving
Or,
according to the, go ahead.
yes. No, go ahead. Go
No,
ahead.
I was going to say the other thing is that, they bought themselves some time. They are, according to the Israeli press, moving assets around to hide them from either an Israeli or an American strike. So it's doesn't seem good, and I think that's why I think that Netanyahu is here to try to clarify what Israel's position is. The Israelis initially, when President said we're locked and loaded and help is on the way, the Israelis like, this is an American operation. We're taking a back seat. Obviously, we have a tremendous interest in what's going on. Obviously, we're going to play a role in it. And they've grown more and more uneasy as time has gone on. And the president has relayed that negotiations are going well. Even though the Iranians say they're never going to give up enrichment, and which gets me back, wait, I thought the nuclear program was totally destroyed. So
Do you think that after everything that's gone on with the protesters and the economy being the way it is and the proxies being weakened by Iran over the last year and the 12-day war, which anybody have an idea for
we're
something
taking
else we
names.
could
We're taking
call
new
it? Well,
names,
taking
right?
names. I'll do a poll in the show notes.
That'll be great.
Um, top three will get a
Gold
poll
star.
going. Yeah.
Okay.
Do you think that Iran would be more inclined to make some kind of negotiation now, or are they still able and plan on maintaining its maximalist position? Because look, Trump has really floated the idea of regime change in this
I,
latest
look, as
military campaign, that supposed military campaign that's coming, and he hasn't done that before.
it seems to me that the Iranians believe that as long as they can wrap the United States around the axle of negotiations, it helps them. Because they don't have an answer to any U.S. military action. I mean, they say that they will, respond by attacking Tel Aviv. And that's a real problem for the Israelis, again, because there's a question whether they have enough interceptors to hit at least that 90% success rate that they had during the 12-day war. Although, look, when I was in Israel in November, I got to look at some of the damage that, that 10% that got through, and it was pretty significant, and they got actually pretty
It can
close.
make it pretty miserable for Israel,
Right,
U.S.
exactly. So
assets in the region,
100%.
terrorist attacks around the world. Yes, the U.S. military would be, disproportionate, but that doesn't mean that Iran can't still make a lot of
That's exactly
miserable
right. And
things for everyone else.
that's what the
And that's
issue
why
is.
That's why the Gulf is not. We both met with a lot of Gulf officials that were visiting, and they're like, no thanks.
Yeah, I no love lost for the Iranian regime, but
Right.
they're worried about their own security. So I think it really depends upon what it is the United States has in mind. A kind of limited number of strikes would not eliminate the threat of ballistic missiles. I think if the Trump administration decides to go big in terms of that's a different story. That perhaps regional countries can absorb some of the damage if it means that there's going to be a major change in Iran. But these are incredible risks, and no one's really willing necessarily to roll the dice here. Is that a mixed metaphor? But whatever. To bank on the
We're all
fact,
about
another
mixed
mixed metaphor, on the United States being wildly successful in a strike on Iran that eliminates this threat.
What do you think Trump's bottom line is? Is it new, or does he just want a
I do.
deal like he has in
Exactly.
the past? Or do you think that he's really wants, no nuclear weapon? Or is he really, obviously Israel wants much more, but is Trump willing to settle for something smaller, you think?
I mean, look, there was Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that the negotiations are over nukes, ballistic missiles, proxies. Then the next day, the president said a nuclear-only deal would be acceptable.
Mm.
And that's when people said, what's going on here? And that's when Netanyahu said,
Y-
I've got to go to
I've
Washington. And then the president said on Fox News, I believe it was yesterday, he brought back nuclear, ballistic missiles, and proxies. So it's really hard to tell what Trump's bottom line is. Often Trump's bottom line is what he wants, and he announces it's going to happen. And then others have to fall into line. But I don't think the Iranians are susceptible to that. So, it's very, very unclear what Trump's bottom line is. I mean, I feel like we're almost back to where we were in May and June prior to the 12-day war. Although I'm not willing to say at this point that there's huge differences between the White House and the Israeli government, because that's always the narrative ahead of one of these things. And it turns out that the gaps between Israel and the United States are never as large as people on the outside believe it to be. So there could be one of the possibilities is that this is coordination. We just don't know. I mean, my own belief is that in the 12-day war, the success that the Israelis had in the first 2 days pushed President Trump into owning this and saying it was a joint operation. Had it not gone well, he would have distanced himself from it. So
yeah, but
again,
you
it's
don't.
very, very hard to tell, because this is a guy who leads with his gut and looks for, the opportunity and to sort of, and for leverage. And it's very, very hard to understand exactly what his bottom line is going to be, because it changes.
You have a lot of resources, though, in the region, just like in Venezuela. Remember, at one point, you have to say,
Yeah,
he
use
can't
it or
keep them
not.
there forever,
Right.
use it or lose it. And this is more than a bluff. Like,
So
he's got all that stuff there for
yeah,
some kind of action, unless there's a good deal.
it seems to me there's, four options here. One, the demonstration of American power in the region, which we really haven't seen since the invasion of Iraq, um, forces the Iranians to be more flexible, and we get, a deal on nuclear, ballistic, and proxies. Seems somewhat unlikely, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
We get limited strikes in the hope that, it rattles the regime and gives, and helps protesters. We get broader strikes intended and consistent rolling strikes on regime targets, ballistic missiles, nuclear, in hopes of bringing down the regime, or a quarantine like they did with Venezuela, and cutting off Iran's oil supplies. That the president is pretty sensitive to that, because that means higher gas prices for Americans. So is that?
And gas prices are so low.
And so the question is, can Venezuelan oil mitigate that risk? I don't know enough
No,
about the
I
oil
know.
market or Venezuelan oil to know that it can do that. So it seems to me those are the four options before the president, and he hasn't really decided.
If you're just joining us, we are with Stephen Cook of the Council on Foreign Relations, talking about all the developments in the Middle East. The thing about the Middle East is there's all this activity. You kind of get a lull while something like Venezuela or Greenland or whatever comes up. And then we're right back to we could be at war with Iran in, any day now. Let's talk a little bit. If you have any questions, put them in the chat. Let's talk about what's going on in the West Bank, because obviously the last few years have been all about Gaza, but those of us who follow the region have been equally, if not more, concerned, not about in terms of the humanitarian devastation, but what the security situation in the West Bank could mean for the region. Israel's Security Cabinet just approved measures that expand enforcement into areas A and B. I'd like you to explain what that is. Also restart land purchases, make it easier for settlers to buy property. And it's being called like annexation, by 1,000 cuts. Talk about
Well,
what's going on
I,
here.
I think that's right. And I think that has been the plan all along. I mean, what we've been seeing in the West Bank is annexation without people calling it annexation. And Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, who also is a sub-minister in the Ministry of Defense, responsible for the West Bank, or Judea and Samaria, as Israelis now call it, has been engaged in a number of efforts along these lines before the Security Cabinet did it. It's essentially expanding the territory in which Israel controls in the West Bank. The settlers complain. I was there in November. They complain for 50 years of settlement in the West Bank. They only control 3% of the land. And Smotrich has been identifying territory and calling it agricultural land that is controlled by settlers. And he's been doing this to expand that control. They say it's to prevent the Palestinian Authority, along with European NGOs, from preventing the expansion of settlements and buying land in Area C. And now what we've seen the Security Cabinet do is essentially come out and institutionalize and publicly claim what Smotrich has been doing sort of very, very quietly, and expanding Israeli security control in areas B and C. Areas B and C go back to the Oslo period, in which are under the control, or nominally under the control, of the Palestinian Authority. Area C is where the Israelis are, and so on and so forth. But now there is an expansion of Israeli security control in areas B and C. And as you point out, it makes it easier for Israelis to purchase land directly in the West Bank. All of this will go to advancing the agenda of what's called the sovereignty movement, who I've spent some time talking to, and their goal is to establish Israeli sovereignty, undisputed sovereignty. Sovereignty, what they say to me is settlements like should
The bigger
be,
ones, right?
Gush Etzion, settlements in Gush Etzion, or the settlements even further afield, should be treated like Ramat Gan, which is, in part of Greater Tel Aviv. There should be no difference between the two of them. There's no difference between Judea and Samaria and the Greater Tel Aviv area, which, no one questions that the Greater Tel Aviv area is sovereign Israel. And that's been their goal, and that's the goal of the sovereignty movement. And Bezalel Smotrich is basically the kind of leader of the sovereignty movement.
Is this about security control, or is this about trying to foreclose the idea of a Palestinian state?
Same side of the same coin, or whatever, however you say it. It is trying to, I think there's three goals: collapse the Palestinian Authority, establish Israeli sovereignty, and preclude a Palestinian state.
What happens if the Palestinian Authority collapses?
Well, I'm an advocate of the Palestinian Authority collapsing, but
No, are you?
wait,
Are
I'll tell you why. Years ago, I wrote a piece. I said, the Palestinian Authority is, setting aside its corruption, it has no legitimacy, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
But it seemed clear to me, this is like late Obama period, that the Israeli right intended to annex the West Bank. And I said, so why would the Palestinians then enable this by doing security coordination with them? So my idea was that they should dissolve the Palestinian Authority and nail the key. And let you want to occupy? Go ahead. We're not going to help you do it. We're not going to help you do it. That seemed to me, because then you have like all kinds of demographic, political, diplomatic problems for the Israelis. You want to occupy? You want to be the occupying power? We're not going to enable it any longer. That seemed to me the best possible strategy, because it seemed that to me at that point, it seemed to me up until, relatively recently, because now the Israeli government really doesn't care about those things, but that to the extent that the Israeli government 10 years ago, 12 years ago cared about those things, it would scare them into saying, okay, we have to do something about this. We can't just be the occupying power. Now, with this government in particular, with Bezalel Smotrich basically in the driver's seat in terms of annexation, they don't care. They have an entirely different narrative about what will happen.
Well, you did see the other day someone saying, yeah, this is basically de facto sovereignty. This is us claiming sovereignty. What's striking is that President Trump says that he opposes annexation. He's like, we have enough problems.
Right. He said that. He said, we have enough problems right now. We don't need this.
Is it for the Israeli government? I mean,
but the question I have
this is a rhetorical question, but how unusual is it for the Israeli government to move this far explicit against the White House preferences, particularly President Trump, after everything he's done for Israel?
Well, so the question I have is, that raises another question, which is, and I don't know, I don't really know, but it seems to me that Bezalel Smotrich and Yisrael Katz, who's the defense minister, were trying to jam Netanyahu before he went to the White House and make this a fait accompli, because that's the thing that's most important to them in the world, is
The West
establishing
Bank. Yeah.
sovereignty in the West Bank and precluding the emergence of a Palestinian state. And we're also in an election season in Israel, so it would be hard for Netanyahu to oppose it. And so
Mm.
the members of the sovereignty movement, leaders of the sovereignty movement who I've met, were very unhappy. In 2020, in late 2024, before the elections here, they thought that Trump would give the green light for annexation. And they believed subsequently, when the president opposed it, they were doing Netanyahu's bidding. So now Netanyahu is jammed, and because there's an election, he can't come out and oppose it. And we'll see what happens with Trump. The question I have for the White House are two things. One, do the Israelis have to say annexation for the president to really come exact, pounds and pounds of flesh here? And what's the U.S. policy response when the Emiratis, Bahrainis, and Moroccans said, this is a red line that's been crossed, Abraham Accords are done? I've said people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and the right really
Would
don't,
they?
they
Do
really
you think
don't care. I don't know.
at this
They say
point,
that
does
they
the
will.
Emiratis look? We have our Emirati friends, but
I
at
know the
any point,
Emirates
at
just,
any point, have the Emirates said to Israel, "Halas, enough is enough.
no,
We're leaving." Even
I have,
in the worst parts of Gaza, did they even threaten
no,
to
which was
leave the
surprising.
Abraham
But
Accords?
I have asked this question of Emirati officials. I've said, what is your red line? Is annexation your red line?
There is no red line.
And they don't
They
really
say
want. They don't
say
want to. They don't
annexation.
want. They don't want to play their hand. I don't know, and that's the important point. Is does this is President Trump's great foreign policy legacy? Does he want to risk it? There is a not insignificant chance that countries walk away from the Abraham Accords. It may be more difficult for the Emiratis now because they're having this rift with the Saudis. But
Which is a whole nother conversation we'll do at some
but
point.
remember, Ambassador Youssef Al-Otaiba placed an op-ed in the Israeli press saying you can have normalization or annexation, you can't have both. Are they willing to have their red lines crossed? I mean, that was very, very clear. And that led to Netanyahu saying, we got to go forward with the Abraham Accords. But, like I said, people like Smotrich, Katz, Ben
They don't
Gvir.
care about the Abraham Accords.
No, this is why, during the height of the high intensity combat in Gaza where, people were getting killed left and right, and people were, writing in the United States, well, they should dangle normalization as a way to get to a ceasefire. I'm like, they don't care about normalization.
Right. Right. To me, we all obviously don't know what's going on beyond the scenes, but the Emiratis are moving closer and closer to Israel and away from, the Saudis. And at what point does de facto kind of annexation here, even without a formal declaration, become irreversible? Are we
It is
close to
irreversible.
that?
It is irreversible. I've spent
Are
some
we
time out.
close to that now?
At least let me answer this question by way of an anecdote. I met up with a contact in central Jerusalem in November, and we were going to Gush Etzion, the cluster of settlements relatively close to Jerusalem. It took about 15, 20 minutes to get there. It was like easier to get to the settlements from central Jerusalem than it did for me to get from Modain in central Israel to Jerusalem that morning. It was like incredible. So I think we are at a place where we're beyond. It is not reversible. It is not reversible. Anybody goes out there sees the infrastructure, the settlements, it's not. This is not like 2005 and uprooting 7,500 settlers from Gaza. It's not going to happen.
This is what we call creating a reality on the ground.
Right. And, when you talk to settler leaders and members of the sovereignty movement, their emphasis now is on like quality of life issues, recycling, bike paths, like the things. I live in the suburbs of Washington, the things that I talk about.
If you're just joining us, we're talking to Stephen Cook of the Council on Foreign Relations. I'm so thrilled. We have about close to 900 people watching, which is a record, which is a Cosmopolitics record.
Nice.
Yes. all of this is happening as next week a lot of Arab leaders and ministers are coming in for the inaugural meeting of Trump's Board of Peace. Now, originally, this was kind of pitched as this new way to manage Gaza reconstruction. Critics say Trump is trying to create this alternative to the UN. How seriously do you take this Board of Peace?
I mean, it depends on what we're talking about. I think there's a sort of grifty aspect to it. You know, you got to pay $1 billion to get a permanent seat on it. For what?
Talk
Like,
about the differences. Like, Jordan is on the Board of Peace, but it's not paying $1 billion. Like,
right,
what
and
is
then
it?
and the Emiratis are on it, the Turks are on it, the Qataris are on it. You know, the usual suspects are kind of on it, but like other usual suspects aren't. Major European allies are not on it. And they've claimed constitutional issues with it and so on and so forth. I mean, I think the Board of Peace, if you took it at its face value when the president announced it, was actually not a bad idea in
For
terms of
Gaza.
for Gaza. Exactly. For Gaza, in terms of getting people's skin in the game to try to figure out and help manage this problem and provide aid to Palestinians and hopefully find a way out of this nightmare. That
And
seems
they
to me
had
because
these
like you couldn't.
committees. The committees that they put together had some pretty legitimate people on them. And when you looked at it, you're like, okay, well, these are serious people that could
Right. I
actually
mean,
help.
as with everything in the Middle East, these things, they get litigated to death and they become, these, I don't want to use a bad word, but you can imagine a circle something. But it was a different idea that perhaps could have helped bring in more international resources and diplomacy in order to help mitigate the problems of Gaza at the very least. Now it seems to me that this is sort of like President Trump and his Board of Peace, and he's the chairman. And I don't really know what it's supposed to do other than um, stroke the man's ego.
Well,
I,
it
I
goes
don't
back
know
to
what
that grift element. It
I
goes back to
suspect
that
they're going
grift
to meet.
element.
They're going to meet. He's going to come out and say, this was the greatest meeting of all time. And he'll announce things that they didn't ever agree to. And then everybody will feel constrained to do something about it. But they will, again, litigate these things to death and complexify them in a way that it it undermines the entire initial purpose of this, which was to help Gazans and reconstruct Gaza. And I think where we're going is there is a yellow line now in Gaza, divides Gaza between Israel-controlled Gaza and Hamas or Palestinian-controlled Gaza. And I think that's going to be the de facto security line there. And it's over, and that is where we're going to end up. I don't see how the president pushes this thing forward because for I think 3 reasons or maybe 4 reasons. One, Hamas refuses to disarm and refuses to abdicate any kind of influential political role in the region. Its 3 main sponsors, Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey, have sought to litigate, except for the Egyptians who said no role for Hamas, but they've sought to litigate the disarmament and political role for Hamas.
Didn't Trump say that it's okay for Hamas to have some arms? I think he said this the other day.
This is the Egyptian and Turkish and Qatari position, which I don't think is going to fly with the Israelis. So, and then the Israelis understand this very, very well and are preparing an offensive in Gaza.
That's what
and
I wanted
have
to
said,
ask. It looks like they're getting ready to go back in.
And have said, this is like not ironic or anything. This time they will be unrestrained. Between October 2023 and October 2025, they were restrained because there were hostages in Gaza. Now they will be unrestrained in seeking to destroy Hamas. And then I think the other complicating factor here is that the way Israeli politics shake itself out, there doesn't seem to be a government that is going to be willing to get off of that yellow line now because of what happened October 7th, which is why I say to people who, passionately defending the Palestinian cause and so on and so forth, I say, and Palestinian liberation is like, you can't possibly have supported Hamas's attack on Israel on October 7th if you believe in Palestinian liberation, because it basically invited Israel into the Gaza Strip forever. Not to suggest that Hamas's goal was purely the liberation of Gaza, but now it's set back the Palestinian cause. So I don't see a combination of Israeli government that is going to get out of Gaza. And I don't think the board of peace is really very serious. And I don't think that Hamas is serious about giving up its weapons or its political role. So where are we?
I
The
don't
poor
know.
Gazans become wards of the international community. Now, the good news there is that, since October, there's been like 54,000 metric tons of aid pushed into Gaza. That's like 1 million pounds and stuff like that. But there's still, which is good. And, you don't have, caloric intake is good and so on and so on. But you
don't have sanitation. You don't have infrastructure.
infrastructure
You
is
don't have
destroyed.
homes.
Right. Exactly. All
Right.
those things have not been addressed. And that's what the Board of Peace and this technocratic committee is supposed to address. And I just think it's all going to get bollocksed up in Trump's pageantry of it.
Right. And
And
say that it's doing great. He already made peace in the Middle East.
right, then he moves on.
But what about Palestinian governance? Wasn't there supposed to be like some kind of,
So they've named this technocratic committee. Ali Shaf is the
which
leader.
is pretty serious.
Right, sure. Ali Shaf is the leader of it. The other names, there are other names for it, but those haven't actually really been confirmed. My research associate, Christina Bori, wrote a terrific piece that's in process that'll be up on CFR.org.
We'll put it in the show notes.
We should put in the show notes that describes who these people are and what their expertise are. It looks like a pretty good group, but no one knows how empowered they are to actually do anything.
Right.
I mean, Rafah was opened under American pressure to the Israelis. The Israelis weren't going to open it. To start phase 2. And the Israelis like, why would phase 2 start? Hamas still has
phase
its weapons.
2 of Trump's peace deal.
The 20-point plan. So I don't see how they're empowered to do anything. They're caught between the pageantry of the Board of Peace, the Israelis being profoundly skeptical of anything that's gone on and do not want to relinquish any kind of control, though don't want to be responsible for reconstructing Gaza, and Hamas, which says, we're in charge.
Connect the West Bank and what's going on in Gaza and everything right now. How do they kind of affect one another? Is there anything that the U.S. Trump says, I don't want annexation. He seems to be more willing to just let this Gaza thing play out, but it doesn't seem like this meeting today is really about any of that. It's more about Iran.
The meeting today strikes me, it's about Iran. And I guess if there's anything on Gaza, I think Netanyahu will once again say, we don't want Turkish troops as part of his international stabilization force. But so far, there is no international stabilization force. There was a report yesterday that Indonesia was going to send forces, and so then the Moroccans, but none of that has actually really materialized. People keep saying, well, Gaza and the West Bank are connected and Gaza and the West Bank are connected. I mean, yeah, in the sense that the Israelis want to make sure that there's no Palestinian state, and are not going to countenance hostile forces on their border. And in Gaza, at least, the forward security border is now this yellow line. And the Israeli answer seems to be, in the West Bank, Israeli sovereignty in the West Bank. And so the situation is dire for Palestinians both in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip.
Which is more likely to blow up?
I think depends on your definition of blows up, at least. I think, the Israelis are poised. They do have a plan to go back into Gaza. So there's the possibility of that happening. And then I think the West Bank is a tinderbox. You have settler violence.
And it's much more close to get. It's much closer.
You have settler violence, but you also have Palestinian violence in the West Bank. I mean, you do have that as well. It's not that the Israelis have been active in the West Bank. The IDF has been active in the West Bank because there was an effort to smuggle weapons and money into the West Bank by Iran and Iranian proxies and so on and so forth. So it is this amazingly complicated mess of potential violence, and there is ongoing violence there. Now, when I was there, I didn't really feel it. I was just in Gush Etzion, which is very close. And I think, if you look at the negotiations from the 1990s, I think that there was a recognition that that block of settlements would be part of sovereign Israel in the event, and that there would be land swaps. But those things are now off the table, right? There's no land swaps. As I said, the Israelis seem to have closed off the possibility of Palestinian sovereignty in the West Bank, and certainly
How
not Gaza. It's not going to happen.
so back to the question, how much of all of this ultimately depends on Trump himself?
So I think, if let's put it this way, if Netanyahu is hoping that Trump would save him from annexation, it hasn't happened because Smotrich and Yisrael Katz got ahead of him. Previously, when the Israelis, when there was this expectation there would be annexation, Trump announced no annexation, and Netanyahu was like, "Well, what do you want me to do? This is President of the United
Yeah.
States. He's been the greatest." Well, these guys went ahead and did it, something that they were already doing anyway under everybody's
And he
noses.
has his coalition, so
And it's electoral season, so I think Trump is also jammed. And so he could say no annexation, but annexation is a process that is well underway. And like I said, I've said this for a long time. We're not going to wake up one day and, like, on the front page of the New York Times or Haaretz or Yediot Achronot or anything, say annexation. It just is going to happen, which is the history of Israel's settlements in the West Bank anyway. It just kind of happens.
right. Um, a couple of last questions as we finish up. If you're a regional player, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, the Gulf, do you feel more confident or less confident about U.S. leadership in the region right now?
If I'm the leader of Saudi Arabia, wait, give it to me again. Saudi
If
Arabia.
you're just a regional leader, how do you feel about U.S. leadership in the region?
I mean, my sense is I'd be quite mixed about America. Like, it's been clear from the first Trump administration that leaders in the region like the Trump administration because they like the way the president runs the United States, because it's quite like the way
Transactional,
the way they run. They're like
yeah,
five guys on WhatsApp. Like,
yeah,
there's no policy
yeah,
process, right? Like, there's no
and it's like
State
a sync,
Department
right,
meeting,
right,
there's no principals meeting, there's no
right,
deputies meeting, there's no
right.
deputy principals
It's a
meeting, and then let's do
modulus.
it. It's like, oh, you got a
Yeah,
problem? Okay, WhatsApp Susie Wiles, and we'll get something
yeah,
done, right? Okay, they like that.
right,
Then, I mean, I think they were very impressed that the president bombed Iran. I think that they're less impressed that the president has given the Israeli prime minister a lot of leeway to do stuff. I mean, he did seem to rein him in a bit after the Qatar strike, which was stupid. I, but I think that they worry about the president's staying power, right? Like, one week it's Venezuela, the next week help is on the way, and then it's a nuclear negotiation. Then we're on to something else. And again, if it's a country run by five people, how could those five people manage all of those issues? And so, the Saudis have often been concerned about the United States being good to its word, and I I don't know how they can be sure that this president will be good to his word. I know that they have a list of complaints about American presidents going back to 2003 not being good to their word, which is why they were so interested in a security pact with the United States. We're like, we're not down with this gentleman's agreement any longer.
right,
Write
right.
it down. Write it down.
Yep. Well, listen, this has been an amazing conversation. Obviously, so much more to discuss. You brought up the issue of Saudi Arabia and Iran and
The
the
UAE.
UAE. That's another thing we're following closely, which maybe we'll get into that another time. Thank you so much. We had about 900 people on today. This
Awesome.
was incredible.
Really fun.
If you haven't joined Cosmopolitics community, please like and subscribe. Look forward to more of these conversations. Stephen Cook, always great to have you, and look forward to the next one.
So happy to be with you, Elise. Always fun. Always
Thanks,
interesting.
everybody.
See ya.
See you next time. Just to remind everybody, Danny Pletka and I won't be here today for Hot Takes Happy Hour because she's coming back from Australia at that time. But we'll be back next week and we'll have more conversations and put in the chat what you'd like to hear about. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.